The Calloway family Christmas dinner had a seating order and everyone knew it. The long mahogany table in my grandmother's dining room seated 22 people. My Uncle Victor sat at the head, not because Grandma Eloise gave him that chair, but because he'd simply started sitting there 8 years ago and nobody had challenged him since. His wife, Aunt Renee, sat to his left. Their son Marcus, who had just been accepted to a law program he would not stop mentioning, sat to his right. My cousins arranged themselves by proximity to Victor, like planets orbiting a sun they desperately needed to stay warm. I sat near the end, beside my grandmother and across from my cousin Tiffany, who was 23 and had recently discovered that wearing blazers to family dinners made her look like she understood finance. It was December 23rd. The table held glazed ham, sweet potato casserole, collard greens, cornbread, and 3 different pies my grandmother had started at 6 in the morning. Everything smelled exactly the way Christmas was supposed to smell. And for the first 2 hours it was fine. Then Uncle Victor stood up with his wine glass. He did this every year. Stood up, tapped his glass, and delivered what he called a toast but what was really a performance review of the family. He started with the wins. Marcus's law school acceptance, his restaurant's recent write-up in the city's lifestyle magazine, Aunt Renee's charity gala that had raised $40,000 for a cause she could never quite name correctly. He moved through cousins methodically, distributing praise like a man who understood that controlled generosity kept people loyal. Then he got to me. And then there's our Maya. He smiled warmly, the kind of warm that has ice underneath it. Still doing her little property thing. Real estate, I said pleasantly. Right. He waved his hand. We support it. We do. He looked around the table for confirmation and received it in the form of polite nods and carefully neutral expressions. But let's be honest with each other because that's what family is for. He raised his glass a little higher. Maya has always been the one we worry about. The one we check in on. The one we, he paused, smiled, looked directly at me, take care of. Aunt Renee nodded slowly. Charity case, he said, his voice carrying that particular lightness people use when they want to say something cruel and call it honesty. And we say that with love. We all know it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. The table laughed. Not everyone. My grandmother did not laugh and neither did my cousin Deja who was looking at her plate. But enough people laughed that the sound filled the room and pressed against me like something physical. I smiled. I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly and set it on the table beside my plate. Excuse me for just a moment, I said. I walked to the hallway. Here is what Uncle Victor knew about me. I was 31. I had dropped out of my MBA program 7 years ago, which my family had treated like a funeral they had to attend. I drove a 4-year-old Toyota Camry that my cousin Marcus had once called responsible for someone in your situation. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in a mid-rise building on the east side of the city. I wore sensible clothes to family events. I asked thoughtful questions about other people's lives and offered very little information about my own. I had been doing this deliberately for 6 years. Here is what Uncle Victor did not know about me. When I left that MBA program, I had already been quietly buying distressed commercial properties for 2 years using a small inheritance from my grandfather, Grandma Eloise's late husband, who had trusted me with $180,000 when I was 22 because he said I was the only one in the family who read financial statements for fun. I had used that money carefully. Then I had used the returns carefully. Then I had used those returns carefully. By the time I was 26, I owned 6 properties. By 28, 11. By 31. The Christmas Eve that Uncle Victor raised his glass and called me a charity case in front of 22 members of our family, I held a portfolio of 31 commercial and mixed-use properties across the city and 2 neighboring counties, with a combined assessed value of $34.7 million, generating $2.9 million annually in net rental income after expenses and management fees. I did not have a public profile. I had structured everything under Calloway Property Holdings LLC, which most people could not connect to me without significant effort. My property manager, a meticulous and deeply professional woman named Sandra Okafor, handled tenant communications, lease negotiations and renewals. I showed up to sign documents and make decisions. I did not show up anywhere else. The reason I had stayed quiet was simple. I had watched what happened to money when family found out about it. I had watched my Aunt Renee borrow $22,000 from my grandmother in 2017 and repay $8,000 of it while describing the rest as help we've all given each other over the years. I had watched Victor expand his restaurant empire, 3 locations, branded as Calloway's Kitchen with a 4th in development, partly on the confidence that came from being the family's financial anchor. He loved that role. He needed it. And I had, without planning it this way, bought the building where his original location had operated for 11 years. 440 Meridian Street. A 4-story mixed-use building in a neighborhood that had quietly tripled in value over the decade. I had purchased it 4 years ago from an estate sale, paying $2.1 million for a building that had since appreciated to a current market valuation of $4.8 million. Victor's restaurant occupied the entire ground floor, 4,200 square feet, under a lease that had been grandfathered through 2 ownership transitions and had not been renegotiated at market rate since 2016. He was paying $11,400 a month. Market rate for that space in that neighborhood today was $28,500 a month. I had never raised his rent. I had never introduced myself as his new landlord. When the lease came up for renewal 18 months ago, Sandra had handled it as she handled everything, efficiently and without drama, extending it month to month while the paperwork was under review. Victor had no idea who owned the building. His checks went to a property management account. His communications went to Sandra. The lease extension paperwork had been sitting in a pending folder for 6 weeks. In the hallway I opened my phone. I typed, Sandra, 440 Meridian. Do not renew. Let the current term expire as scheduled. No extension, no new offer. Standard non-renewal notice per the lease terms. I sent it. Then I walked back to the table, sat down and asked my grandmother if she needed anything else from the kitchen. Sandra's non-renewal notice went out the following business day, December 26th, addressed to Calloway's Kitchen LLC at the registered contact for the lease. The notice was courteous, professional and clear. The landlord had elected not to renew the current tenancy. The existing month-to-month arrangement would terminate in 60 days, per the lease agreement's standard terms. All parties were encouraged to make arrangements accordingly. Victor's business partner was a man named Gerald Hutchins, who handled the operational and administrative side of the restaurant group while Victor handled the brand and the rooms. Gerald was the one who received the notice. Gerald was the one who read it 3 times before calling Victor. I know this because Tiffany told me in a text message she sent me on December 27th that read, "Girl, did you hear? Uncle V's restaurant on Meridian got some kind of eviction notice or something. Gerald has been calling him all morning. Christmas dinner drama continues lol." I replied, "That's stressful. Hope it works out." Then I put my phone down and went back to the property analysis I'd been reviewing for a potential acquisition in the warehouse district. My mother had died when I was 9. Breast cancer, fast and thorough, leaving behind my father, my younger brother Kendall, and a grief that reshaped everything about how our side of the family was treated from that point forward. Victor was my mother's older brother. After she died, he had appointed himself a kind of authority over us, checking in on my father with the energy of someone monitoring a situation rather than supporting a person, commenting on our house, our clothes, our choices, with the calm certainty of a man who believed his involvement was a gift we should be grateful for. My father was a quiet man, a civil engineer who worked hard and loved us completely and had no talent for the particular social combat that Victor preferred. He absorbed Victor's commentary for years. When I was in high school, Victor had told my father at a family barbecue, loudly enough for 6 people to hear, that Kendall had more raw potential than I did and maybe my father should focus his energy accordingly. My father had said nothing. I had said nothing. I had gone home and opened the financial literacy book a teacher had given me and read it cover to cover for the 3rd time. I didn't become successful to prove Victor wrong. That's the version of the story that sounds better, so I want to be precise. I became successful because I was good at it, because my grandfather believed in me, and because I found that the quiet accumulation of real assets was more satisfying than any argument I could have won at a dinner table. But I would be lying if I said Victor's voice wasn't somewhere in the background during every 5 a.m. morning I spent reviewing acquisition reports. I would be lying if I said I hadn't thought about 440 Meridian every single time I sat at his restaurant's best table, invited by family, treated like a guest while secretly being the reason the lights stayed on. I had not planned the Christmas dinner moment. He had done that himself. The first 2 weeks of January were quiet on my end and I would later learn, extraordinarily loud on Victor's. Gerald had immediately begun looking for comparable spaces in the neighborhood. He found none at a price that worked. The ground floor of 440 Meridian had become the operational and reputational heart of the original Calloway's kitchen location. The one that had been featured in the magazine, the one Victor brought investors to, the one he referenced in every pitch for the fourth location. Relocating wasn't just logistically complicated. It was symbolically catastrophic. Gerald called the property management number 4 times in the first week. Sandra responded to each call professionally and consistently. The landlord's decision was final, the non-renewal notice stood, and any questions about the process should be directed to the contact information provided in the notice. On January 14th, I received a text from my cousin Marcus. "Hey Maya, random question. You wouldn't happen to know anything about commercial real estate stuff, would you? Dad has a situation with his restaurant space and I thought maybe you'd have contacts or something." I replied, "I know a little bit. What's going on?" He explained the situation in careful, minimal detail, clearly coached to share only what was necessary. The lease on the Meridian location wasn't being renewed. The landlord, some LLC, wasn't negotiating. They needed to either find the decision maker or find new space, and neither was going well. "Who's the landlord LLC?" I asked. He sent me the name. I stared at it on my screen for a moment. "Calloway Property Holdings LLC. "I'll see if I can find anything out," I replied. On January 22nd, Victor called me directly. This was notable because Victor had not called me directly, not for any personal reason, not to check on me, not for anything, in 4 years. His communication with me happened at family events or through my grandmother, or occasionally through Aunt Renee, with the particular warmth of a woman delivering a message she found beneath her. "Why, His voice was different. Not soft exactly, but careful in a way it had never been with me. "I'm calling because Marcus said you might have some connections in commercial real estate." "I know some people," I said. "We have a situation with the Meridian location." He explained it efficiently. The non-renewal, the timeline, the fact that they'd been unable to reach the actual decision-maker through the management company. "We have about 45 days left. I need to get in front of whoever owns that building." "What would you say to them?" I asked. Pause. "I'd ask for a renewal. Offer a longer term. We've been in that space for 11 years, Maya. We've been good tenants. What kind of renewal terms are you thinking?" He mentioned a number. It was closer to market rate than his current arrangement. He'd clearly done some research, but still roughly $6,000 a month below what the space would command on the open market. I was quiet for a moment. "I'll reach out to my contact," I said. "I can't make any promises." "I appreciate it," he said. And then, because he was Victor and he could not entirely help himself even in a moment of need, "I know real estate isn't exactly your main thing, but every little bit helps." "Right," I said. "I'll be in touch." I asked Sandra to schedule a meeting for January 28th. I told her to book the conference room at our property management office, a clean, professional space on the 14th floor of a building downtown that I also owned, and to prepare the full lease file, the market rate analysis, and the property valuation summary. I told her I would be attending personally. Victor arrived with Gerald and a commercial real estate attorney named Patrick Osei, who was carrying a leather portfolio and the practiced calm of someone paid to project confidence in difficult rooms. They were shown to the conference room by Sandra's assistant and offered water and coffee. I arrived 7 minutes after they did, which was intentional. I walked in wearing a charcoal wool blazer, my hair pulled back, carrying nothing but my phone. Sandra was already seated at the table with the files. I sat at the head of it. Victor's expression moved through 3 distinct phases in approximately 2 seconds. The first was recognition. The second was confusion. The third was something I had never seen on his face before in 31 years. A quality of recalculation, like a man suddenly unsure of the ground beneath him. "Why, He said my name the way people say a word they've suddenly lost confidence in the meaning of. "Uncle Victor." I folded my hands on the table. "Gerald. Mr. Osei." I nodded to each of them. "Thank you for coming in." Gerald looked at Sandra. Sandra smiled professionally. "You're," Victor started. "The owner of record for Calloway Property Holdings LLC, I said. "And the landlord for 440 Meridian Street, yes." Patrick O'Say, to his credit, recovered first. He opened his portfolio and clicked his pen. Gerald took a long drink of his water. Victor said nothing for a moment. Then, how long? For years, I said. I purchased the building from the Whitmore estate in 2020. For years, he repeated. He looked at the table. Then he looked up at me. And you never said anything. You never asked, I said. And to be fair, you've always been very clear about your assessment of my professional capabilities, so I understand why it wouldn't have occurred to you to ask. He had the decency to absorb that without deflecting it. Gerald leaned forward. Miss Calloway, we're very interested in discussing a renewal. We've been in that space 11 years. We've made significant improvements to the interior at our own expense. I have the records, I said. Sandra slid a folder across the table. I also have the current market rate analysis for the neighborhood, the building's updated valuation, and a summary of what comparable ground floor commercial spaces in that corridor are currently leasing for. Another folder. I want this to be a transparent conversation. Patrick O'Say reviewed the market rate sheet. He kept his expression neutral, but I saw his pen slow on the page. The current rate, I said, is $11,400 a month. You've been in that space for 11 years at essentially the same rate, which I want to acknowledge. The previous owners didn't adjust for market appreciation, and neither did I for 4 years. The current market rate for that space is $28,500 a month. The silence in the room had weight to it. That's nearly a $17,000 increase, Gerald said. That's correct. Victor was looking at me. Not with the warmth he performed at dinner tables, and not with the contempt I was accustomed to receiving from him. He was looking at me the way a person looks at someone they are seeing clearly for the first time and trying to figure out how long they've been missing it. I'm not here to extract maximum value from this situation, I said. I'm here because you asked for a meeting, and I thought you deserved to have it with the actual decision maker rather than leaving you to chase someone you'd never find. I paused. I'm prepared to offer a renewal. 5-year term. $19,800 a month, which is below market, and I want that noted. In exchange, I want first right of refusal on any sale of Calloway's Kitchen LLC assets related to the Meridian location, a personal guarantee from you on the lease rather than just the LLC, and I want the interior improvement records formally documented and credited to the property file. Patrick O'Say was writing quickly now. Why would you offer below market? Gerald asked. He wasn't suspicious, he was genuinely trying to understand. Because it's been 11 years, I said. And because I'm not interested in destroying something that works. I'm interested in terms that reflect where we actually are. Victor was still quiet. I looked at him. You have until February 7th to accept or decline. If you decline, the non-renewal stands and we'll list the space at market rate. We already have 2 inquiries. I slid a final sheet across the table, our broker's preliminary interest summary. I had not solicited those inquiries specifically for this meeting. They had come in organically when word got out that the space might be available. Victor looked at the sheet. Then he looked at me. The charity case, he said. Quietly and without the glass raised. The landlord, I said. But close enough. Victor signed the renewal on February 6th, 1 day before the deadline. 5-year term, $19,800 a month, personal guarantee included. Patrick O'Say had pushed back on 2 clauses and I had held on both. Sandra processed the paperwork with her usual precision. The first check arrived on March 1st. The family found out in pieces, the way families always find things out, through peripheral conversations, overheard phone calls, Tiffany's inability to keep information to herself for longer than 48 hours. By mid-February, the general shape of the story had circulated. Maya owned Victor's building. Maya had been Victor's landlord for 4 years. Maya had more money than any of them had imagined in a direction they hadn't thought to look. My grandmother called me on a Thursday evening. I knew your grandfather picked right, she said, which was the most she said about it and the most that needed to be said. My father called me on a Friday morning and cried for about 45 seconds and then composed himself and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner that weekend, and I said yes. Marcus texted me. I owe you an apology, and also can we talk about real estate investing sometime? I replied, dinner sometime. My treat. Victor did not call. He did not text. He did not address what had happened at the Christmas table, or the 4 years of proximity to something he hadn't bothered to look at, or the glass he had raised in a room full of his family and the word he had wrapped in warmth and pointed at me. I didn't require that call. I want to be honest about that because it matters. I had not sent Sandra's text to force an apology. I had sent it because a man had called me a charity case and I was the reason his business still had a home, and I thought that deserved to be true whether he ever knew it or not. His knowing had turned out to be a side effect rather than a goal. In March, I attended the family Easter gathering at Grandma Eloise's house. I arrived with a sweet potato pie and a bottle of wine my grandmother liked. I sat near the end of the table as I usually did. Victor sat at the head as he always did. He did not make a toast. When dinner was served, he passed the bread basket to me first. It was a small thing. He didn't say anything when he did it. He just picked up the basket and held it in my direction before serving anyone else, and there was something in the gesture. Not apology exactly and not acknowledgement in any form that named what had happened, but something that I received quietly and set down inside me without ceremony. I took a roll. Thanked him. We ate dinner. By the spring of that year, I had expanded Calloway property holdings to 34 properties. The portfolio had crossed the $37 million mark in assessed value. Net income for the prior fiscal year had been $3.1 million. I had also begun work on a community development partnership with the city, a mixed-income housing project on a parcel I owned in the East Corridor, designed in consultation with neighborhood associations and structured to generate both financial return and genuine community benefit. The city liaison who managed our initial meetings was a young woman named Destiny who reminded me of myself at 24, and I had started making introductory calls on her behalf to people I knew in urban planning and development finance. I did not announce any of this at family dinners. I did begin slowly and selectively letting people in. My cousin Deja, the one who hadn't laughed that Christmas, turned out to be finishing a degree in urban planning, and I invited her to shadow me on 3 property walkthroughs in February. By April she had asked if she could work for me part-time while finishing her program and I had said yes. My brother Kendall, who had been working in project management for a mid-size construction company, started sending me questions about development timelines and contractor vetting. We had 3 long phone calls in March that turned into a conversation about whether there was a role for him in the community development project that made sense for both of us. There was. The family I had chosen to build quietly was beginning to include some of the family I had been born into. Not all of them and not without discernment, but some. The ones who had always sat near the end of the table with me. The ones who hadn't laughed. Uncle Victor's restaurant at 440 Meridian continued to do strong business through the spring. The new lease reflected the actual value of the space and everyone knew it, and the arrangement worked cleanly in the way that honest arrangements tend to work. On a Tuesday afternoon in late April, I drove past the building on my way to a site visit. The restaurant's sign was lit. Through the window I could see the lunch crowd, tables full, the room warm with the particular energy of a busy dining room in the middle of a good service. I slowed down for a moment. Looked at the sign. Calloway's Kitchen. My name on his building. His name on my sign. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about $180,000 and a book I'd read 3 times and the particular kind of faith that doesn't announce itself. Then I drove to the site visit and got back to work. This is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes.